System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' Inner City Left.
This is the Inner City Left broadcast. Today is Tuesday, January 14th. I am METMK. That is Emoja Lil Tanky Sumler. Emoja, hello, how are you? How are you feeling now that we
can't be saying
the lovely island of Puerto Rico?
Can't be saying another day in paradise. I've been to paradise, and now I'm just in the capital of the universe. It's such a downgrade.
I know. I thought it was such an interesting moment that we were down there right when this two things I think that were very important in Puerto Rico, or at least a conversation. Like three things, actually, now that I mentioned it. First, Luma and the power grid that can't stay on. Number two, the Bad Bunny album that dropped, where he's talking about gentrification. He's talking about, the coastal areas being bought up by these like wealthy landowners. And like, of course, we know about gentrification. We live here in Washington, D.C. And also the white woman who was burning down the bars from Missouri. And while we were down there, all this is happening. So
flew back to Missouri, no problems, no check for at the airline. Like, damn, it's crazy.
They check my bags.
It's always like this, man. And I get why a lot of people are against tourism, you know what I'm saying, against vacationing. I remember when I was in Okinawa a billion years ago, or the Ryukyu, as they like to call themselves. People always talk about free Taiwan. I say free the Ryukyu, right? I'll let y'all catch up on that because it's a whole nother episode. But I remember being there, and there was a huge sex scandal. It was an American soldier. They whisked his ass right to the base, and they whisked his ass off the fucking islands. No jurisdiction, no case, And all that's left is the pissed off population. Everywhere we go, Americans act badly, man. And this is a part, this is not the fucking government. This is you. This is you. For all the things you can put on the government, this is like when people were like, this is again, and I know it's not a big thing, but a big point of what we're talking about today. But this is where I have my breaks with the Scott Ritters and the Brian Burlettics. So they're like, oh, identity politics is a distraction. No, a black person knew they couldn't have went to fucking Puerto Rico and set restaurants on fire because you didn't get served and confidently get on a plane. Y'all have been a shivering bitch, man. Right. Ooh, the TSA, I'm talking about my temperature always spiking. Let's pull this, we was already gonna pull his ass aside for a little extra screening, but now let's extras. Anyway.
Right, fine tooth comb. Yeah, anyway, I appreciate everyone who kind of went through that last episode with us. Check it out. It kind of got a little messed up at the end, but I thought there was some great things in there. Let's talk about what we want to talk about today, though. I appreciate y'all letting us rock with the intro.
The last thing I will say about that, though, even with that episode, it's indicative of what we're talking about because we couldn't keep the damn internet router up long enough to really submit the whole episode. That's what Puerto Rico is right now. That place could be fucking paradise. It could be Hawaii.
And it's just like once the West gets their tendrils and tentacles into your system,
good little claws.
It's difficult to get out, and we can see that happening in Hawaii, like you said. I think is a great example. Puerto Rico, another great example, but not the only one. So let's talk about this in general because energy is important. So let's go all the way from Puerto Rico. Let's take this thing all the way over to Russia because there's something I want to talk about. This Transnistria gas shutoff deal that's happening for 500,000 people in this. I don't know what to call it. I guess it's like a declared state. And about 500,000 people live there. And they are now going to be, within 5 months, going to be without power. And they're sort of being starved out. We also know that Russia and Ukraine's, the area, the Donbass, is very high in rare earth minerals. And black rock is a huge part of the process. When the borders are drawn, they will have the most property there. So I want to throw all that at you. I mean, we always talk about sort of this cultural difference between Russia and Ukraine, but the energy crisis and the energy war seems to be pushing this conflict even more. What are your thoughts on that?
All of the wars, especially of the 21st century, the first quarter think about that, a quarter of the 21st century is in the books, you know? Um, all of the wars so far have been resource wars. And you can make whatever argument you want to make about the 20th century, maybe allege that there were ideology wars, perhaps, maybe not. But undeniably, all of the great wars of the 21st century have been resource wars. And this is another great example of it, right? What was the first major act that happens is the blowing up of the Nord Stream, which is where most of Europe was getting its very cheap natural gas from, you know, in the demise of that, which, by the way, you know, they say that's back on the menu, boys. Somebody's going to buy it. There's rumors that a Trump donor, a heavy Trump donor, someone that gave him like $400 million. I'm not going to say the name because it might be a rumor, but is alleged to be in talks to buy the rights to the Nord Stream. At least Nord Stream 1, the one that didn't get blown up. There's actually 2 Nord Streams. Which will be pumping. So it's going to be, once again, right? It's an American tax on energy going to Europe. You know, daddy gets his cut. Whereas there was no cut for the Americans at all. You know, that's a resource. That's not ideology. It's important to remind you, we're not talking about the fucking Soviet Union. We're not talking about communists in Russia. That's the second largest political party, by the way, which we try to remind y'all all the time. Y'all act like it's just Putin, but the guys under that are the commies. You know what I'm saying? They're not.
His name? Was it Navalny? Is that the right name?
Right.
Remember he died in prison?
Yeah.
They were saying that he was the...
he's not even Poland. Yeah, I mean, it's like saying...
What's his party, though? Like, where's his party? If shouldn't there be another person?
His party has a Jill Stein level of power. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like, okay, you gonna run, but we know you ain't gonna fucking win,
Exactly. You're not a serious contender.
You're not a serious contender. Is that to say nobody would vote for you? Of course not. Of course, someone is drawn to your ideology. Anyway, but as it relates to Transnistria, right? So this is another opportunity for the Ukrainians to set a trap as they see it in ostensibly NATO, right? Because Transnistria is a portion of Romania, not Romania, Hungary, Moldova. Right, that has declared independence, right? So it's so funny, right? Whenever, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croatia, when they want to declare independence and join the EU, we gotta let freedom ring, we gotta let that be. But then you get like Transnistria is like declares independence from the Moldovans, and it's like, oh no, this is some bullshit. The Russians, but these are ethnic Russians, but they're landlocked between Ukraine and Moldova. So, both being, Moldova being an out and out NATO member and Ukraine ostensibly being a de facto NATO member, in all but name, and so because the Ukrainians refused to allow gas line to go from Russia to Moldova, because the Russians were like, look, if you're going to get the gas, you're going to pay for it, just like everybody else. And what the Ukrainians have been doing is siphoning the gas they needed before they sent the rest of Europe. So, like, you're getting free gas. And Russia's like, no, fuck that. Gazprom is like, no, fuck that. People will say it's Putin, but Gazprom is a corporation, just like Exxon, just like BP. You know what I'm saying? Except way bigger. Way bigger. And so, so what they've done is they've essentially shut off the power to Transnistria. You said several months, but the reports I read are about 58 days. And so that's the trap, right? Because one of the reasons, aside from denazification, that the Russians are in Ukraine right now is to protect the native Russian speakers that were essentially ostracized and villainized and made into a minority that is being preyed upon, right? That's what happened. And so that's the exact same scenario for these Transnistrians, right? So like that's the trap for the Russians. Can they get there in 2 months with enough time to save the Transnistrians before they run out of oil and resources and are ostensibly reclaimed either by Moldova or subsumed by, Ukraine as it exists. But Ukraine is playing dirty as hell right now, and people are letting them. I mean, that you and I know because we watch day-to-day reports of what's happening, not CNN, but actual battlefield reports, because this has been the most televised war of all time. If you know where to look, you can literally find out what is happening in every town, sometimes almost in real time, but at the very least, update several times daily about actual footage of what's happening. And last night, the Ukrainians fired a salvo of a combination of 200 flying objects into traditional Russia, old Russia, a mix of missiles, ATACMS, and drones, most of which were shot down, but into Russia. That's incredibly provocative. One of the things they aimed at was a chemical plant. They tried to create a Bhopal Junction type chemical incident. This is not a stable regime. These are not the acts of a responsible government, and Zelensky at this point is hard to see him as anything other. Look, you can put it on him. You can put it on Sersky. Because remember, Sersky was essentially a spook before he got the job. His whole strategy has been very different from Zaluzhny's, which was, we will meet the Russians in the field. And say what you want about Zaluzhny's tactics, but Zaluzhny had victories under his belt, I mean, the great counterinsurgency of 2022, that was under Zaluzhny.
It's hard to put people in power that are very competent, because when your war is so politicized, people who are good at what they do go, oh, this isn't going to work. And
right.
That's what happens with most of really any of these, conflicts that the United States is using, like a proxy war. You do what you're told. And that's sort of what, what was the guy they always talk about is call him like the slaughterhouse or something. I can't remember.
Oh, no, you're talking about the new general that was given the Prokop. Yes, he's given the southern area of the Donbass. This guy, yeah, they talk about the Russians with meat grinder offensive, but this is literally the guy. You're talking about the guy that lost the whole counteroffensive on Robotina. And he was summarily dismissed by Zaluzhny. What the fuck is he doing, bro?
He's willing to just say, run into this buzzsaw, which is the Russian army.
Until the buzzsaw jams. And that's what we're going to do. Right? Sersky's totally okay with doing that kind of shit.
All right, so let's keep it in Europe here. So, okay. German left-wing chancellor candidate Sada, I'm not going to get this last name correct.
Yeah, no one can.
Wagenknecht.
Yeah.
Wagenknecht, okay.
Wagenknecht
has called for lifting sanctions against Russia and maintaining the import of Russian gas. In her view, the U.S. sanction policy has nothing to do with Ukrainian conflict and is solely aimed at boosting the American economy, saying something that we've been saying for a long time. Garland Nixon has been saying for a long time. That
Vicki Nuland said it first. Fuck the EU. What did y'all think she meant when she said that? She knew the United States wouldn't suffer. She knew that provoking a war, an energy resource war with energy-rich Russia would adversely affect the EU. But this was about maintaining American hegemony. And if we have to sacrifice the Europeans, that's what we'll do. It's a game. The great game of chess is played by sacrificing players, if you need to win the game. You can look at Europe as like a rook, not quite a queen. You know what I'm saying? And they're willing to sacrifice that rook to get a check. And that's what happened. They've, and Europe is suffering. Volkswagen closed down their first plant ever. You cannot do manufacturing without cheap energy. How did the Americans do it in the 19th century, right? They utilized all that cheap coal and they utilized river power, right? Cheap energy. That's the power behind industrialization. You may want green energy to consumers, but you can't exactly fuel an aircraft carrier on green energy. You can't do that. You definitely can't build one. Think about a shipyard with just the you just couldn't pull the wattage that you need. You need cheap energy, and don't get no cheaper than natural gas. Especially natural gas that you can pipeline. CNG, that compressed natural gas, that's not very cheap. They both burn very clean, but one is clean and cheap, and that's what the Russians had. And it's a direct competitor to what the Americans are serving. And it's just that simple. Europe's suffering is good for American profits. And this doesn't change when you're talking about a Democrat or Republican, because these policies were put under place under Barack Obama and continued under Trump and excoriated to the point of explosion under Biden. That's 3 different presidencies that these policies did not change at all on. Maybe the difference is, one president gave a little bit more weapons, one president gave a little bit more money, but all of them provoked Ukraine to pick a fight with Russia. And now it looks like the Americans are poised to extricate themselves from this mistake. Poor Ukraine.
Let's expound just on that a little bit, because we've been hearing about this, and I wanted to know, do you feel similar? Do you think the United States and the NATO could be on a separation path?
Fuck no. It's a squeeze play. The Ukrainians, right? They look, the Europeans know that the Russians really have no interest in territorial conquest in Europe. What the fuck are you going to do with a bunch of Germans? You going to teach them how to speak Russian? You going to teach them to learn to love Nabokov and shit? No. German culture is German culture. Russian culture is Russian culture. And if that's the thing, this is why the Mongolians were successful. They'll eradicate your fucking city and destroy anybody that speaks the fucking language. That's how you conquer, right? If Russia's not willing to do that, then what's the point? Right? And they're not willing to do that. They have no interest in doing that. Their interest is making sure no one encroaches upon them, changes their cultural values. But the thing is, you have provoked despair now to the point of you don't exactly know what's going to happen. And the Americans are like, oh, shit, Oreshniks is getting fired. Ain't no real answer for that. Look, we got other things we can do. We out. But Europe doesn't have that luxury. Europe has to deal with that now, right? And so, that's why Europe is in this place where Europe can't extricate itself and the United States can't. Once again, Victoria Nuland, fuck the EU. They started a fight that's going to have consequences for them for the next dozen or so years. It's going to take a long time for them to gain their manufacturing base back again, to bring inflation under control again. And so as far as Trump goes, right, what he's doing is the reason why it's a squeeze play is he can go to the EU because the EU is in a desperate position. They've provoked Russia in a way, whereas if it becomes a real conflict, Europe cannot defeat Russia without the help of the United States. All of NATO together, right, without the United States is not enough because they're not a reliable coalition in that way, right? Not when it comes to Russia. Oh, hell, they're all united to go to get a war against Libya or Iraq, But when it comes to Russia, again, what would you need? You would need to make sure you can ensure the Turks are on your side, which good luck with that, since they're about to they're threatening to potentially go to war with Israel, right? Erdogan is a deal, dude. What's the deal? What's in it for me? You know what I'm saying? And if he's not given the resources that he wants in Syria, if he's not given leave to deal with the Kurds the way he wants to in Syria, there's no guarantee that you could count on Turkish involvement in a war with Russia. And if the United States are not there, the Turks absolutely become immediately the most important next army because they have the largest standing trained army. And as we all know, counting on Erdogan is a fool's errand, man. You can never be sure what Erdogan is going to do. So that's the leverage that the Americans have, right, when it comes to NATO. It's like, look, we might can help you out with this Russia thing. I'm going to take Greenland. That's the cost. If you want me to save you from Russia, Give me Greenland. Everyone thinks that Trump is playing, but this is a geopolitical. You have to understand, because most Americans don't. American missile defense is housed in Greenland. Not all of it, but a good portion of it, right? This is where they, in a place called Thule, right? Which is a very interesting place. It's a big Norse word. Because again, it's supposed to be the early defense against a strike coming from Russia or coming from China or any of those places that ostensibly would attack the United States and just go over the North Pole, because that's actually the shortest route. If you control Greenland, it gives you another shot. And this is the thing that the Americans really understand with the advent of things like the Orishnik. They know they got to put way more missile defense up now. Way more. Because they know that what they got is not good enough. The Yemeni Houthis is getting past, you know what I'm saying? Getting past that in Israel. You know, God knows what the Iranians could do. Theoretically, Thad wasn't up, but I suspect that it was when they did their attack earlier. What's that going to be like? You know, with what these new weapons that the Chinese are working on that no one's even seen. What's that going to be like when Russia launches a true saturation attack with an Oreshnik system, right? You need all your stuff up fast. Americans don't understand geography. They don't understand. They're not. How about this? Americans are not used to America potentially being a real target. But Donald Trump understands. This is the game of hegemony. Is starting to get the gap between these technologies is getting extremely close. You know, I remember, you know, I look up systems and, you know, more and more information is coming out about the Aurora, you know, which is supposed to be the premier 6th generation plane. That was the white whale of conspiracy theories in the 90s. Oh my God, you know, America's got this plane. It can be anywhere to anywhere in 30 minutes. It's actually why Space Force was invented. And everybody talked about you like you was crazy. Aurora, that's not real. You're thinking about the SR-72 system. And it's like, no, there's a whole new thing. So now what? We get 2 to 3 6th generation Chinese jets dropped. Now all of a sudden it's like, look at the newest American weapon, yo, Aurora. Now it's not a conspiracy theory. Now it's real. Oh, this weapon that puts everything behind. And, you know, you always got to wonder, what has America got in the deep docks that they ain't had to crack out yet? But they're being forced to crack that out now. They're being forced to demonstrate as a, because they have to once again establish primacy. You know what I'm saying? It's the remnants of the neoliberal, neocon, you know, establishment that still believes that full spectrum dominance is a possible thing. We can be the best everywhere. We can have the most planes. We can have the most aircraft carriers. We can spend the most. We can have the largest army. We can have the best technology. Maybe in the 90s, not anymore. You know, science is science, and it's science all over the world. You know, so if you put out some new, you know, peer-reviewed engine spec for, oh my God, this is a hypersonic engine. You know, these guys want to get their PhDs. So those papers are read all over the world. You know, they're not just read in America. They're not just read at Oxford and MIT. Scientists all over the world. Oh my God, look at the specs on this ramjet. And you start to implement these technologies yourself. Never mind the fact that you have your own scientist. Yeah. It's important to acknowledge when you're talking about, again, the global South. China has 1.5 billion people. They might have more scientists, right, in China than scientists in the entire West combined. That's what having a population advantage like that is.
Certainly other than India, you know?
Right. Well, India's not the West.
Right. Well, right. Yeah. All of the West. I thought you said all the globe. I'm
right.
to talk about this. You know, they always talk about, and this is being said for like the last 2 decades, Africa is the continent where they see the most growth with any of the other continents in the world. Obviously, you know, Europe has stunted their development for many years, and you start to see the Sahel states, and you know, sort of the leadership surrounding there going, we actually like Russia. You get China.
Yeah, we ain't got no problems with it. Yeah.
Yeah, they come here and they pay the fees to mine, and we get our money, and we don't have to, sell them uranium at like
$12 a barrel
or something, whatever, $10 a barrel. And you have China out here, sort of, and again, this is just what we understand from a geopolitical standpoint. China is canceling these debts, continuing to do better business than the West. I'll just say better business in the West. And Russia is the same. That's why many of these leaders are choosing, China or Russia. As you see, sort of, especially, like the Sahel states, you obviously have, West Africa, South Africa. There are lots of areas in Africa that are sort of gaining this technology that you were talking about earlier. Everyone is gaining this technology. Everybody in the world wants internet access. Everybody in the world wants electricity and clean water and a developed world for the most part. How do you see that playing out in the future? And what is this resource fight we're seeing in the continent?
Yeah, one of the things I see a lot is they act like it's actually a competition between China and Russia in Africa, right? Even in the whole sphere of influence theory that a lot of people are trying to posit that Trump is on, and maybe they're right, maybe that's what he's trying to do, concede there'll be three great empires, the American empire, the Chinese empire, and the Russian empire. My problem with this is the Russians haven't shown any desire to work from an imperialist perspective. They, unlike most of Europe, they actually killed the imperialists. It was a big deal, Anastasio. Oh, poor Anastasio. They killed those guys, totally different guys took over. They were super anti-imperialism. In fact, they fought imperialism all around the world. You might have heard about these guys. Right. And China also has shown no interest in wanting to be imperial. The people that misconstrue that do not really interrogate what that looks like. We talked about the Ryukyu earlier, right? No one considers, most people do not consider contemporary Japan to be imperialistic. Certainly not by the standards of which Japan was imperialistic in the early 20th century, right? But under no circumstances would anybody ever consider a referendum for the Okinawans becoming an island of their own. You are a province of Japan. No one does this with China, right? They don't give them that same grace. Oh my God, Taiwan, it's a country. No, it's not. Even the United States says it's not. It's a province of China. They consider themselves the Republic of China. You know what I'm saying? But of China is the operative word there. It's a province in there, the same way Macau is, the same way Xinjiang is, the same way Hong Kong is, right? And for Americans that have a problem with that, I offer you California, the Bear Republic, right? Texas, the Lone Star State, right? Most of these countries consider that, these places consider themselves to be an independent nation, at least consider the possibility. California considered independence. Texas achieved it for a brief period of time and was subsumed in. Though the United States is imperialistic, you normally don't consider that to be the high watermark of their imperialism, right? Even places like Puerto Rico, where we just were, Hawaii, right? These are places that were absolutely autonomous nations at one period in time, right? So that's what I'm saying as it relates to these things. And with Africa, they see Africa as, up for grabs. It's not worth going for. It's like Dutch Schultz when he goes to the mafia. He's like, yeah, we're getting this money in Queens. We're getting this money in Harlem. And the Italians are like, who gives a fuck, man? A little bit even. It's no money. It's not worth it. That's what Africa is to the West. They see like all of their resources are already gone. So to them, it's not worth it to continue. But China and Russia are not in competition. Russia is providing military guidance and often supplying military weapons that the West will not sell to Africans. They see them as sanctioned. And so it's like, that's the other thing. It's like to them, the Russians won't play along. You're not supposed to arm the Negroes. You know what I'm saying? And China is providing infrastructure and what they call win-win cooperation. which is anathema to the whole American ordeal. Again, the thing in popular culture that you would have to compare it to would be why the reason that the Landstroth hated the Atreides. The Atreides were dealing fairly with people in a way, whereas the corruption was being dismantled. What? These guys aren't bribing people, man. It's fucking it up for me. I want to bribe people, right? That's the Chinese. The Chinese are doing this win-win cooperation that is not zero-sum game, which is the Western style of cooperation, which is really always competition. There has to be a winner and there has to be a loser. And that ultimately is why capitalism is a failing enterprise.
People, again, I think the word that we need to focus on is imperialism and historical context.
Right.
In historical context, China and Russia don't have anything to do with the continent. But
Right.
we can look at Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, many more. Gaddafi. Was that China or Russia? Oh, well, that was the West.
Right. Tell me about the role the Chinese played in the transatlantic slave trade. What are the Russians?
Mhm.
Oh, nothing. They had nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
So, of course, Africa doesn't have the toxic fuel with them.
Who owns 50% of the land in Namibia? Not the Chinese, the Germans.
Right.
Who's King Leopold? And Congo? What is that? China? No, that's Belgium.
That's Belgium.
What about?
Tell me, how is there such a thing as Belgian chocolate? Where in the fuck does chocolate grow in Belgium?
Yeah. What about Charles Taylor in Liberia? I mean, what about was America starkly against the apartheid in South Africa? Was that what was going on?
Not at all.
Oh no, they
And most of the West saw him as, Boris Johnson made fun of the South African government after it was ruled by black people. So these are the good guys who just happen to always be wrong.
Or China,
Right.
no, they kicked out the French. Oh, that's right. And Burkina Faso and Mali.
Right.
More countries are on the way, ready to kick out the Europeans. They seem to have an issue with the Europeans.
Instead of adapting to these circumstances, people like Macron just continue to further exasperate the situation by saying things like the Africans forgot to thank us. See, that's the shit that runs them straight into the arms of Russia. Why would you say some shit like that?
And I think what's important, again, Africa is still developing. Many countries. If you're gonna fight the West and you're gonna fight sort of this European Western imperialism, how are you gonna do that without allies? I don't understand what people think is gonna happen. Oh, you just declare independence and you become a socialist country. Like that doesn't happen. Why did Thomas Sankara get killed? Why are there no more Patrice Lumumbas? Why are Gaddafi's gone?
This is the fundamental
Nobody kills
mistake
them.
that liberals continue to make, right? Neoliberals, which execute these policies, and liberals that believe the neoliberal lies, right? You believe that these are about ideology. Oh my God, it's the domino theory. No, it's about power. It's about power. These are the reasons why they're terrified of a guy like Traore. He represents an African masculine, what's the word that I want to use? Militancy. They haven't seen nothing like this since like a Hugo Chavez. And they, or like a Saddam, right? Saddam, good or bad, it's not about saying Saddam is some kind of great person, but it would be inaccurate to not acknowledge he represented a certain subset of masculinity for Arab, militancy for Arab masculines, right? That is just gone in his absence. Who is the big Arab macho, right? All of those guys got killed. That's that whole Ba'athist line of, pan-Arab, militant, strong, right? The closest you have to that now is Sisi. And he's not strong in that way. He's a military guy, but he's not like a military guy that's for the people, right? And say whatever you say about Saddam Hussein, right? I'm not here to advocate for him at all. But he loved Iraq and he loved the Palestinians. And he was willing to go to war to protect them.
You can say the same thing about Assad,
Right. And Assad's not a very masculine man, but
Okay.
yes.
But again, he was a part of the Pan-African philosophy.
Pan-Arab Ba'athist, yeah.
Pan-Arab
Mhm.
Ba'athist. Again, so like it. If you don't like I'm sorry, if you don't like Assad, that's okay. I'm not saying like him. I'm not saying
Right.
you should go hang out.
But you
with
do
him.
have to represent what.
But
Right.
We're losing Assad and we're gaining head choppers. I don't know
HTS.
how you can see that as a win. Again, I'm not advocating for good or bad. And also, good and bad is a silly.
It has nothing to do with geopolitics. Good and bad is, yes, it's childish and it's juvenile. And if you're still looking at good leaders and bad leaders, you need to grow up, man. That's not how it's immaterial.
I want to give a shout out to our podcast listeners. We're available everywhere you find podcasts, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, we also have a Patreon. You can hit us up on patreon.com/innercityleft. We've got some new patrons over the holiday weekend / 2 weeks or whatever it was. So let's give them a shout out. Sophia San Marco, Kate Sauer, Monica Marcial, Joe DeVito, Lori Joel, Nikki Enfield, Riggedy Pellegrino, Nat the Rat, Lucy Newman, Samantha Guerrero, Dumpy, Tom LeBeau, Turn Leftist, Kelly Lieta, Dubsy22, Jake Olart 94, No Ground, RK, Paula Lapoderosa, Liza Piercy, Lauren Bullock, Suzette Tobb, and Dennis Amadeus. Y'all the real heroes. We have a budding community going on in there. And I just want to thank y'all again. As you saw kind of our camera and our exploits while we were in Puerto Rico, we're still working that out, but that is...
Screw technology, hate black people. I'm sitting right next to this man. I'm like, can you show this beautiful face? I'm kind of thirst trapped by the revolution. I'm on a little tropical island. And they like, no, your face is the color of burnt locks.
Yeah, right. So we're working it out. And again, we appreciate y'all and money community in there. Yes. Lil Tanky, any final thoughts?
Stop thinking about ideology. Your ideology matters to you and your faction. And if your faction is willing to do nothing more than vote for your ideology, you have a failed ideology. Again, black activists used to talk about this before the influencer era. You know what I'm saying? Frederick Douglass said, agitate. You know what I'm saying? Power concedes nothing without a struggle. Voting is not struggle. I'm so sorry. And people like Traore see this. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's something you have to hold on to. The Panthers understood this. You know what I'm saying? You have to be willing to stand up for what you believe in a real way and maintain. Can you hold land? Yeah. That's what power struggle is about all around the world geopolitically. And everybody's trying to do the same thing. Take land or hold the land that they got. And that's not done with debates. And it's not done because you believe different from me. You take it because you can. You hold it because you can. That's it.
And I suggest people, look up Resource Curse. There are many that we missed. I think Papua New Guinea is another country that has been completely destroyed by these, geonational corporations. And also the Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Again, just talk about how you can come in, get people in debt to build these resources. The conversation surrounding Panama and the canal. Canada is like the 51st state and all these other things. This is going to continue to escalate as we move through climate change. And it's just important for us, I think, to all acknowledge that this thing that we've talked about for many years, the fight over things like fresh water and all those other things are currently happening right now. And developing nations are going to get the brunt of that, climate catastrophe. For Emoji Tanky Summer, I'm Amin TNK. This is the Inner City Left broadcast. Peace.
System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' Inner City Left.